The letter crackled as it burned, greasy smoke twining into the rafters of the Lord Commander's solar. Snow hissed in the brazier where the coals threw a dull red. Jon stood with one hand braced on the edge of the heavy table, the other pressed flat to the old map of the north, pinning the parchment as if Winterfell itself might slip away unless he held it fast. Outside, wind clawed at the high stones of Castle Black, and the night made its old bone creak, that long complaint of ice upon ice. Ghost lay by the fire in a puddle of white fur, head up, red eyes fixed on the door. They had brought the letter to him just past midnight, with wet boots and pinched faces, the storm carried in on their cloaks. He had known whose hand it was before he broke the seal. He had known by the stink of the words. "Bastard son of a bastard," it had said. "Come and see. I have your sister. I will flay her and send you her skin for a cloak. I have your little brother too. Kneel, or I will come north and kill every man, woman, and child who shelters under your wall." The flames took the vellum before his anger did. Jon watched the edges curl and blacken, watched Ramsay Bolton's hand become ash. It should have soothed him. It did not. The words had already done their work. He drew breath, tasting the smoke. The door opened without a knock. Not sleeping then. Tormund Giantsbane ducked his broad shoulders through the frame. His beard beaded with frost, the leathers across his chest furred white where his breath had iced. He sniffed and grunted. "Smells like burning lies. Good smell." "It is war," Jon said. His voice sounded very calm to him, which meant the opposite. "He has Sansa." Tormund's laughter died. He stepped up to the table, thick fingers trailing lightly over the map's inlaid rivers and little painted trees. "You are sure? You read it to the end?" "Yes." He slid the charred black ribbon from the ashes. A scrap of pink wax still clung to it. "And if it is a trap, it is the sort of trap you take with open eyes. The sort of trap that demands a jaw strong enough to break shut." Tormund's eyes were on Jon's face. They were good eyes, blunt and honest as a fist, and there was pity in them no more than there was in a winter wind. "You can't be two men, Crow. One man holds a wall of ice against dead things. One man goes south to fight the living. Which are you?" "The same man I was when I let your people through the gates," Jon said. "The same man who will go south to keep them alive. Bolton says he'll come north and butcher them. He will. He loved that in his letters, the carving up of women and children. He means to starve us, bleed us, break us. If I stay, I lose them. If I go, I may lose them slower. But I cannot let him do it. And I cannot let him touch her." Tormund scratched at his beard. "You speak as if you have no brothers in these black cloaks, and they are not watching you with long eyes. You tear a bit from their oath. It will be your own blood that drips." Ghost lifted his head, teeth glinting. A memory stirred. Maester Aemon's soft, wasted hands. Jeor Mormont's voice like gravel. The words he'd spoken 1,000 times and kept 1,000 more. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins. I am the sword in the darkness." He had carried those words through fire and snow and the black mouth of death. He had meant them. He still meant them. The oath was not a chain. It was a promise. Sometimes promises led to doorways without handles, and you had to shoulder them open. "Wake the stewards," Jon said. "We muster what we have. I'll speak to Ed at first light." Tormund's broad grin showed white through the beard. "Ed, he always looks as if he's swallowing an icicle. He'll be a fine lord of this little wall while you go playing at Lordling down south." "I'm not playing." Jon reached for his cloak and the silvered wolf head pin. His hand trembled as he fastened the clasp. He pressed the tremble flat with the weight of Longclaw on his hip. "We go before dawn. And the brothers who think to stop you?" Tormund did not trouble to lower his voice. In the corridor beyond the door, steps had paused and then went on. Castle Black carried sound like a shell carries the sea. Ghost rose and shook himself. The flames made his coat a living thing. Jon ran a hand along the direwolf's neck. Warm life under thick fur. "I will not stop them doing their duty. And I will not let them kill me." He had meant to leave them a note. He had meant to let one world end gently while he strode into the next. The wall taught that gentle endings were mostly lies. He went out into the corridor with Tormund. Cressets guttered and hissed with blown snow, and the floor felt treacherous under his boots. There were men awake who were normally asleep when the fire was low and the night deep. There were eyes from shadows. There were glances that flinched away too quickly. Tormund's hand touched his shoulder. "When we reach Winterfell," the big man said low, "we will let the world know we came. We will not creep like foxes under a henhouse." They took the steps down in silence. The yard was an uneven tarn of hardened snow, old prints crusted in it like scars. The dawn was a ghost behind the clouds. The men of the watch were gathered where he had ordered, by the armory, by the stables, at the base of the steps to the Lord Commander's tower. Ranks stood stiff as pikes. Jon thought he could smell iron, and not only from the weapons. He stepped off the last stair, and Alliser Thorne stepped out from the line. "Lord Commander," Alliser said. The rain of flakes made a white frosting on the black of his hair. "What rumor is this of marching south with the savages?" Tormund bared his teeth. Jon answered without looking at him. "Truth, not rumor. Lord Thorne, I will do what I must to protect the people we took under our charge. You swore an oath." Alliser's mouth twisted in a shadow of the old contempt. "You swore to defend this wall, not to play hero in the snows of the south. Your father's name does not make you a Stark. Your sword does not make you a king." "I have a letter," Jon said. He raised his voice so the ranks could hear. "Ramsay Bolton writes that he has my sister and my brother too. He writes that if we do not bend the knee, he will come here and burn and flay and take." He held their eyes one by one. "You do not have to follow me. Any man who wishes may stay and keep to his oath. Any man who thinks I betray that oath may say so now." He expected Bowen to speak first. Bowen looked at the snow. Alliser took a single step, a shadow thrown by his own stubbornness. "I do not give leave," Alliser said. "If you walk with wildlings south of this wall, you are no brother of the Watch. I call that treason." "You may call it what you like," Jon said, "but you will not draw blades on me tonight." Someone moved at the edge of the crowd. The boy Ollie, his mouth made a grim line older than his years. Others were shifting as well. It stood like a post under rime. Jon's heart remembered how to beat too fast. The yard was a tinder field. "Stand aside," Jon said. He meant it to be gentle. Came out like ice in a cup. Alliser's hand closed around the grip of his sword. Jon did not see his own fingers move. Longclaw came up and out, the pommel a familiar weight. The old bear's gift very cold. Ghost eased to Jon's left, fur lifting in a ripple. No, Tormund's voice was a red rooster's crow. "Not this way. There are moments when the world tips and you can see the road you should take as plain as cart ruts." Jon saw Alliser's worn face, the scar the wildlings had given him 20 years ago, the brittle pride that had carried him through nights a softer man would not have survived. Jon had hated him once. You hate the man who puts his boot on you without remembering who taught him to wear boots. Jon lowered his sword. The breath he drew felt like swallowing a knife. "I will name Edison Tollett to command in my absence," he said. "I will leave the Watch stronger by leaving it at all. The free folk will hold the gift. They will answer to Ed while I am gone, and they will answer to me when I return. We will send back grain and weapons from Winterfell, or we will send back our bodies." Alliser's fingers did not leave his hilt. "You will not return," he said. "But go if you mean to. Know that you go as a deserter. And you know," Jon said very soft, "what I do to deserters." A murmur rose and died, each man swallowing a different truth. Alliser did not take the bait. He stepped aside. Jon felt his bones loosen. He had not known until he knew. He gave Ed a glance. Ed's face did not change, but he dipped his head barely. It would be all right or it would not be, but Ed would hold what could be held. Jon nodded once to Tormund. The free folk began to move, the low thunder of boots and pack ponies and the arrhythmic drumming of spears against shields. They left at first light, if it could be called light when the sky was an iron bowl and the world a white massacre. The gate yawned behind them and the wall loomed like the back of a frozen god. Jon rode a shaggy Garen with a stubborn head and a habit of tossing it so his mane hit Jon's cheek, as if the beast thought he could cudgel his rider into turning back. The road south ran like a scar along the foot of the gift. They moved in a long, ragged column, the free folk a river that had found new banks in which to run. The north did not welcome them. Trees screeched their old songs under their cold burden and ravens croaked insolently from branch to branch. Their breath made ghosts that fled as they watched. Jon's men, from either side of the wall, learned to hunt quietly, to keep the fires banked, to let the snow take their prince as soon as it could. They passed empty crofts and fields where summer's stubble wore their snow like old men with white hair. In the long shadow of a black barrow they found a child frozen upright against a wall, little hands clawed in the air as if she had tried to catch the falling snow. Tormund carried her body to the edge of a wood and built her a pyre of birch while her mother rocked silently beside him, breathless with grief. The others watched with their faces blanked by cold and tragedy. There was too much of both to be left in the skin. Jon stood with them and felt every year of his life. At Mole's town, a handful of villagers slunk from their holes like foxes and then slunk back. A woman of 30 with a face already carved by the future tried to sell her daughter to the Wildlings for a loaf of bread. Jon had what bread there was given to her, and the look she gave him made him lowly in his own sight. He dreamed that night of a hall whose fires would not burn. On the fourth day they came to the long lake, a white field that seemed to go to the edge of the world. A blown cliff of snow hid the far shore, as if the lake refused to be counted. They camped in the lee of a low hill where the wind had gnawed away the snow and left a dark bite of earth. They ate broth of hares and of roots bitter as ale gone sour. In the middle of the night Ghost lifted his head, ears pricked. Jon woke with Longclaw in his hand and heard it. Hooves on ice, a small kingdom of hooves, crack crack, the sound of men who were careful but could not hide that they were men. Tormund rolled up to a knee like a bear sitting up. He grinned again. Friends, Jon said. Friends who keep their banners rolled, Tormund said. Or else friends who hide a knife behind a kiss. They stood the column too. Jon rode out with 4 others, Ghost padding at his stirrup. The strangers were a dozen, cloaked in white and gray and covered in the good thick furs of men who had known the north all their lives. The leader's hood was down, his face fox-quick and hard with the kind of handsomeness that survived hunger and bad winters for a reason. The second rider beside him threw back her cowl and Jon's breath stopped. Auburn hair, pale face, eyes that had learned to look straight through most walls. Sansa. He did not think. He was off the horse and she was off the horse and they were brother and sister again, stumbling at each other like they'd forgotten how to walk. And then her face was cold against his cheek and his arms were around her and nothing else existed but the shape of her head and the smell of her hair and the terrible relief that went through him like hot wine. Jon, she said. The name was a prayer and a sob. Jon. He had no words. He set her back and looked at her properly and saw the hard angles that had not belonged to the little girl who had loved songs and lemon cakes. He saw there something that could cut. He saw a pain he could not ease by killing one man. He hoped to ease it anyway. How? He said. The gods would, she said. The weirwood knows all the ways out. Theon. A shadow crossed her face and then she did what he had always loved her for. She mastered it, and it did not master her. We escaped in the snow. We hid in a broken tower till a man from the Riverlands found us. He knew your name and mine. He had been riding north to ask for men. I turned him about. We followed him along the ridges, keeping off the road. The harder-faced man nodded to Jon. Lord Commander, he said. The name I keep for a little while longer, Jon said. He looked back at Sansa. He has Rickon? She closed her eyes. Yes, the Umbers, Small Jon. Her mouth tightened. I do not know why. I know only that the boy is there. Ramsay shows him in the yard as men show off hunting dogs. Jon felt a sickness begin in the bottom of him and move up like winter advancing. Then Winterfell is where we go, he said, with faster feet than I planned. Tormund swung off his pony like a boy. His grin now was a version of kindness. We'll make your Prince of Flayers sing a cold song, he told Sansa. Then we'll cut his throat to stop our ears. She bowed her head in a movement that was neither thanks nor denial. The wind made a harper's sound in the birches, and the horses shifted and stamped. Having said her piece, Sansa set her shoulders. "Do you have allies?" Jon asked her. "Names that will stand between us and winter?" "Names," she said. "Some small, some silent. The Mormonts will send men if asked. Lady Lyanna is fiercer than her grandfather, so old Nan used to say. The Ryswells send their eyes and their mouths but not their swords. Lord Manderly writes that his ovens are hot and then writes that his ovens are cold. The Karstarks will not help us, nor the Umbers. The Serwins will send boys with courage. A handful from the Hornwoods, a few more from the woods, a few from the hills. Not enough." "It never is," Tormund said. "That's why men say stories about the few who stood and made it enough." "I sent letters," Sansa said, "where I dared. I signed them not with the name I took when I was acting a part, but with my own. The raven feathers will be falling on the snow for a week." Jon nodded. "We will go to Bear Island," he said. "We will ask in person. And then we will go to Winterfell whether any come or none do." He rode back through the camp with his sister and the man from the Riverlands, whose name was Galbart, and he felt how a column changes with one person joining it. How hope makes a different sound than hunger. Men lifted their heads. Women put back their hair with hands that did not tremble as much. The Wildlings looked at Sansa with faces that meant nothing to anyone who had not learned their language. Those faces meant, "She is one of his, and that makes her part of us." That meant something. By noon they were riding south along the frozen shore of the lake, and Sansa was telling him everything she could about the inside of Winterfell. "They repaired the collapsed wall in the eastern ward," she said. "But they did it like men patch a shirt, loose threads, bad seam. Too much lime in the mortar. It looks strong. It is not." She showed him where the kitchens were now and where the smokehouse had been moved, and she told him who slept in the great keep and who in the guest house, and she told him where Ramsay kept his hounds and how the hounds were exercised, and how many men-at-arms were on each watch, and the shape of the bells, and even the way the snow drifted against the lip of the battlements. She remembered everything that could help and nothing that could hurt. Jon listened. That was all he had to offer that was not blade or blood. He could listen. At Bear Island, the hall was full of hard light and salt smell and the blunt faces of people whose lives were made by working with their hands. Lady Lyanna was a small girl in a high-backed chair, a mix of beauty and stubbornness that made an old ache in Jon's chest. "You are the bastard," she said, studying him as men of twice his age did when measuring a plank. "From Winterfell, that was. The one who wears black and keeps wolves." "I was," Jon said without flinch. He did not put on softer words. If she was as much a child as she looked, he would have to treat her as older than he, and if she was older than he by nature or by the long winters she had survived, he would have to treat her as himself. "And I still do, though the cloak I wear now is what I earned, not what I was given." She squinted at Tormund as if he were a bear someone had led into her kitchen. Tormund grinned and spread his big hands. Lyanna's mouth almost set. She looked to Sansa and inclined her head. "We received your letter," she said. "We do not answer quills and ink. We answer with what we have." "We ask only what you can spare," Sansa said. Lyanna pursed her lips in a way that reminded Jon of his little sister, the one who had walked about with a wooden sword and a mind full of wolves. "If we spare any, we die," Lyanna said. "So we spare none. We send what we have." She banged her small fist on the chair arm. That SI. Ample gesture sounded as loud in the hall as a war horn. 62, she said. "Everyone a Mormont. Everyone will die before he lets a Bolton put a boot on his neck." 62 is an insult, growled one of the men behind Jon, a Southron sellsword who had made himself useful ferrying messages. Tormund backhanded him hard enough to make his teeth click. 62 born on a rock where the sea tries to kill you every day is 62 more than you deserve, the big man said. "Hold your tongue, kneeler, and try not to step under a woman's foot when she is walking." Lyanna Mormont almost smiled, which on her face was like a sunrise at midwinter. "I like him," she said. I will send a she-bear to keep him from losing his way." They left Bear Island with 62 and a string of boats that would put them on the mainland again. The Mormonts did not sing them off. Men who expected to survive made long goodbyes. The Mormonts simply looked, and that was blessing enough. As they rode through the snowy pines beyond the cape, Jon felt the pressure change. They were moving towards something that would not be avoided. In the evenings he drilled the free folk in shield walls, and in coming off shield walls into knives, and he watched Sansa speak to the small lords in quiet corners, her voice low, sometimes roughened with the effort not to weep and sometimes hard as a knife. He remembered her as a girl who had believed songs always ended with the singer happy and the night warm. Now she believed something else, something colder but truer. He did not know if truth or warmth made a better bed. He hoped she would have both. They came close to Winterfell in a week's time. The great earthwork and stone of the old castle rose from the white like a sleeping beast. Smoke rose from it in threads that the wind kept plucking apart. From the ridge to the west Jon could see men walking its wall. He could hear a hound baying in the yard beyond the great keep. He could still smell the smell that had meant home for so long. He had not known it was a smell until he lost it. Fire-treated stone, meat, horse piss, the faint sour sweetness of the godswood. It nearly unmade him. He stood for a long time with his hand on the neck of Ghost, feeling the wolf's slow breath. He did not pray. He did not know who would hear him. He counted the men on the battlements instead. Counting kept him from falling down into what he felt. "Winterfell," Tormund said softly, and Jon thought he heard both contempt and a curious kind of awe. "I see why you kneelers wrap your hearts in these piles of old rock. Doesn't keep out the cold. Keeps in the stories." Jon smiled despite himself. "Some of the stories still have teeth," he said. "We will make one." They pitched the main camp in a little hollow spattered with willows, out of sight of the walls, and sent out small bands to watch the roads and the fields. That night the sky cleared and 1,000 stars punched their cold holes in the dark. It was so bitter the air felt brittle in the nose. Around the fires men spoke in murmurs. A woman from the Vens sang a song so old even she did not know its words. She put a wordless hum where language had fallen away, and the sound made Jon think of water running under ice. At dawn Jon sent Sansa with Galbart and a handful of Mormonts over the low hills to a farm he had known as a boy, where a shepherd with a crooked back had always had a warm hello and a way of telling the weather that never had to do with clouds. They came back by noon with sacks of oats and a little smoked mutton and the shepherd himself, who wept without shame when he saw Jon. Jon set him to boiling oats into something like food and gave him a furred cloak, and the man sat by the fire all night with his eyes full and his mouth open, taking in every word. The days that followed were hard and quick. Bolton's outriders tested them. Lean men on lean horses, with bits and buckles that had been polished with blood. They came close in the fast pale dusk, shot arrows into the tents, and fled laughing. Jon sent his own riders, and they did not laugh as much. They killed two, dragged one back with a broken leg, and cut him loose after he told them what he knew. The man limped off into the dusk with a face that knew it was not leaving any map a man would want to follow. There were smaller meetings too. Farmers who had hoarded a little grain and brought it out when they heard the name Stark spoken like a fire at night. A woman who had hidden an old mail shirt and put it on her son and sent him with them, her face as stubborn as Bear Island's rock. A boy who came running from the river with 2 trout and the news that the old mill had collapsed under snow. One afternoon, trading words with a nervous man from the bar Rollins, Jon heard a sound he knew too well. Men cheering in a voice that wasn't cheer. The sound that comes when men are forced to enjoy a thing under another man's eyes. He took Ghost and half a dozen of the Wildlings and moved along the ridge like a fox. They came to the lip of a shallow bowl of land. Winterfell was much nearer now. It seemed to occupy half the sky. In the shallow bowl below, a man had been tied to a post and stripped to his waist. Another man walked around him with a knife, testing the edge with his thumb, smiling with a mouth that had learned to smile in wrong places. A ring of soldiers stood around them, under Ramsay's red flayed man. There are simple sights that make a body feverish. Jon's vision went narrow and hot in a breath. "Jon," Tormund warned under his breath. "Wait for the arrow shot to answer the arrow shot." Jon did not answer. He did not think. He drew, and Longclaw went out and down as if he had been made for this one piece of motion. He slid down the snowy slope like an otter into water. He did not take his eyes from the knife man's hand. He could feel Ghost moving with him, and behind him there was the sound of men being pulled, led along in the current he had made. The knife man turned. He had quick eyes too, and smiled and raised his voice to the men around him. "Look," he said. "You can smell the wolf before you see him." He did not get to smell much else. Afterward, Jon cut the bonds of the man at the post, an old soldier by the look of him, calluses built over calluses in his hands. His eyes were wet, though the rest of him was so frozen his hair had the look of wood. "My lord," he said, in a voice that made Jon wince to be called that. "My lord. He took my son to show me what it is when skin meets air. He said he would make a trumpet of my insides." He could not say it. Jon could only put his gloved hand on the man's shoulder and stand there in their joined breath until the man remembered how to stand without leaning. Later, when the men were asleep and the fires burned to low lumps of cherry red, Sansa came to Jon's tent and stood in the doorway a long time. The lamplight made a halo of the snow in her hair. "Do you have a plan?" she asked. Jon half smiled. "So many men ask me that, and they always make it sound as if the plan will kill or save them like a god. I have a thing I will do. I will try to make the other men do what I want while I am doing it. Does that count as a plan?" "It does," Sansa said. She stepped inside, wrapped her cloak tighter, and sat on a chest. His tent smelled of leather and damp wool and iron and him. "Tell me the thing." "We draw him out," Jon said. He leaned over the rough map he had drawn on board. "Ramsay's strength is inside the walls, but his weakness is his pride. He will want to show us he can break us with a cavalry charge out of his own yard, run down wild men in the snow, make a sport of it. If we can pull him into the open ground there," he tapped the half-drained moor to the southwest, "then the ground will do our fighting for us. It's churned up, half ice, half mud beneath. His horses will flounder. We will put the giants there." He did not smile at her quick glance. "There would be one giant in truth, and we will let him break against them. Then we bend his line and go for the gate. And if he does not come out?" "He will come for me," Jon said, and Sansa knew he was right. She lowered her eyes lest he see too much pity. Sansa nodded slowly. "And Rickon." The name was a thorn she had to grip to pull. Jon's mouth was very thin. "If he uses him as a lure, we do not chase the lure," he said. "He will try it. He will want the shape of it. There is a mark in him that wants to snap snares shut with his teeth. He will offer your brother as a point to run at with our heads down. If we run, we die." Sansa's hands were claws in the fur of her cloak. The pupils of her eyes ate the light. She looked at him and nodded as if he had said something clean and gentle. He had never loved her more than in that moment, and never hated himself more. He bent his head. She rose, came to him, laid her gloved hand on the back of his neck, and stood for a moment. "You will not die," she said. "You don't know that," Jon said. "I do," Sansa said, and for a heartbeat she looked like their mother in a way that hurt him in his teeth. "You are too stubborn." On the day of the battle, the snow had a fine salt texture and the light was milk and steel. Jon woke before dawn with his heart pounding for no reason he could name. He went out of the tent and into the quiet where breath steamed up for a moment and vanished. Tormund was already awake, sitting on a sawn log with an axe across his knees, looking at nothing. He spat into the snow, examined the color of it as if reading a message, and nodded. "It is a good day for killing a man I hate," he said, "and a bad day to die of small cuts." Jon looked up. He could see the Bolton banners on the walls. They made the red man look small against the winter sky. A raven flew across, its shadow sliding on the snow. He thought suddenly of Maester Aemon again and of what the old man had said about love and duty and how they were not opposite. He put men where he had said he would. The Mormonts stood with the free folk on the broken moor, their helms too large on their heads and their hands steady on their spears. Lyanna Mormont's 62 looked like 600 because they did not move. Jon placed 1-1 in the shallow draw, where the ground was a hidden bog under a crust of white. The giant sat on his haunches like a boulder and let the snow fall on his hair. The last time Jon had seen a giant this still, it had been dead. He turned his head very slowly, and 1-1 looked at him out of eyes that had a child's bewilderment in a mountain's face. Jon lifted his hand. The giant lifted his. A huge door swung by a strong hand, and let it fall again with a soft thunder. Riders came out of Winterfell with their banners unfurled. Black for the dread fort, and then the red flayed man, smears of bright on the winter. Ramsay was there, on a beautiful destrier that arched its neck and moved like a man showing off. He had dressed himself like a lordling for a tourney, and the grin on his face worked like a blade. Beside him, carried in front like a new weapon, was a little boy with hair like a dead leaf and eyes too big in his thin face. Rickon. Jon felt his blood go somewhere else and leave him cold and light. He heard Sansa's breath beside him catch and change. Ramsay raised a hand and called across the field in a voice that carried like a trumpet. "Brother, Stark bastard, come and fetch your pup." Jon made himself a statue for one long breath. Then another. Then he moved a step forward, and that was almost the ruin of it. He could not say later ever what stopped him. Perhaps Sansa's hand gripping his sleeve so hard she left the shape of her fingers on his flesh through the leather. Ramsay took a dagger from his belt and cut the rope binding Rickon's wrists. He patted the boy's cheek, smiled at Jon, and gestured with a flourish across the field. "Run!" He called to the boy, pitched so that Jon and only Jon would hear the soft of it. "Run to your brother." Rickon looked once at Jon and then ran. There is no way a boy goes across winter ground except to stumble. His legs wanted to be the legs they had been when he chased wolves in summer. He almost went down, caught himself, ran again. The snow threw his little feet back at him. Jon could feel each of those steps memorizing themselves in his heart. A hush fell that made the wind sound loud. Ramsay took an arrow from his quiver with the languor of a man taking a fruit from a bowl. He knocked it and drew it back and let it sit there in the full draw as if the bowstring were patient as he was cruel. He let fly. The arrow went in a long, easy arc that was beautiful if you did not remember what anchored it. Rickon did not fall. The arrow struck the ground ahead of him. A sliver of wood sprang into the air. Ramsay smiled again. He took another arrow. Jon moved. He did not think. He did not weigh Sansa's hand on his sleeve now. He did not hear Tormund shout his name. He went down the slope and into the field and onto the level ground where he could run, and he ran. He ran like he had never run. The ground wanted him. He did not look at Ramsay. He did not look at the lines of men who had taken a breath together as if the air would be the last and longest. He kept his eyes in one place. Rickon's face, the little mouth open, the soft flush on the cheek where he drew breath, the look in the eyes that said he had learned too much in a year. A third arrow came. Jon heard it. It spoke in the air. He swerved without thinking. It went past his shoulder and hissed into the snow. He was almost there. Rickon's small hands reached for him as if he could pull himself into safety with his fingers. The fourth arrow took Rickon in the back. It went through him. He made a sound that was not a child's sound and not a man's sound. It was a sound from a different sort of throat. He folded without ceremony, with the gracelessness of real death. Jon went to his knees and caught him. He did not know how long he stayed there. Long enough to feel the heat go away. Long enough to hear Ramsay's laugh and to look up and see the first line of riders coming. A black tide of horse, and the way their breath made banners of steam. Long enough to hear Tormund's voice like a horn and to feel the ground shiver under hooves. Jon laid Rickon down with care, as if the boy could feel the hurt of clumsy hands. He stood, pulled Longclaw free. He stood on that field alone in front of a world made to crush him, and he felt something slip loose in him. He had spared men at the wall. He had given away bread. He had kept the door open as long as there was time to keep it open. Now he let it swing shut. The first rider aimed for his head. Jon stepped into the swing, cut hard, felt the jar of steel and bone, and then there were three of them circling and striking, and they were very good, and it did not matter because he was better where he stood and because Ghost was a white knife at his side that made horses scream. The breath was knocked out of him by the near pass of a rider's knee. He went to a knee and came up again, and the world had become what the steel could make of it. The free folk came down as if the hill belonged to them. There were men who had fought with steel since they were 12 summers old, and men who had learned to fight with hunger, and men who had learned to fight with the lust for life itself. The Mormonts kept their line and made the field into a maze that a horse could not read. Tormund threw himself at a pair of riders and made them pay him both their lives to go through him. One rose from his crouch and swung a tree trunk he had stripped and held in his hand as if it had been cut to suit him. The trunk met horseflesh and armor and air, and the air boomed. The first crash of the lines made a sound like the wall splitting. Jon fought to draw the Bolton cavalry into the boggy ground where the horses flailed. He gave ground with a will, stepped back and sideways, showed them gaps and then closed them. The Boltons were disciplined, but they did not know this earth as he did. He had run here when he was a boy. He had been thrown from ponies here and had cried into the snow when he thought no one had looked. He put the ghosts of his boyhood to work. He let them whisper where the ground would hold and where it would give way. He made Ramsay's men ride their beautiful horses into winter's teeth. It should have been enough. It was enough to save the line for an hour. It was not enough to save Jon's heart. Every time his sword bit and came away, he saw Rickon's small hand touch his wrist and then slide away. He could not put it out. He did not want to. He took the grief and he turned it. He put it in his shoulders and in the set of his mouth, and the grief did not weaken him. It bent him like a bow and sent him further. Ramsay did not smile now. He sent wave after wave and called them back and sent them again, testing the sets of teeth on the other side. When he saw the horses ragging and slipping, he shifted tactics without shame. This man had never had shame, and began to try to encircle them, to hedge Jon's men into a ring, to close, to strangle. "Back!" Jon shouted. His voice was raw with the cold air. "Back to the hill. Don't let them circle you. Give them the rope and then wrap it around their own necks." Tormund roared something that might have been words. The Mormont captain bellowed. Banners shifted like the snowdrift when the wind changes direction. Men began to move not as scattered sparks but as a flaring together. The encircling lines tried to close. They found that what they meant to crush had become a blade. They cut themselves on it. An arrow went past Jon's ear and touched the skin there with its fletching. His ears rang. He turned toward the origin of the shot and found Ramsay looking at him from the saddle, his mouth set in the straight line of a man who is learning something he does not want to know. Jon held his eyes as he fought. That was where the battle was, in that gaze as much as anywhere on the field. Wind ground the snow into every aching place. Men went down under horses. Horses went down under men. One bled from a dozen bright places, but he still swung and stamped and crushed and roared like a house falling down. Ghost took a wound from a spear and came away with the spear broken, and his white coat dyed a furious red. The world tightened and loosened, tightened and loosened. There were places where men were fighting with knives because there was no room for swords. There were places where a spear was a snake and a shield was a boat, and a man could float on it if he remembered how to breathe. The day went by doing that. By late afternoon, the field was a churned mess that would remember feet for 100 years. The Bolton flag still flew on the battlements. The free folk were still on their feet. They had not been pushed back to the hill. They had held, and now they had more than held. Near Jane Poole's father's old orchard, on the left flank, the Bolton line stuttered. Jon was there with Tormund and 3 of the Mormonts, and the moment came again, one of those long flare moments, and Jon pushed. He pushed with all of it. He pushed like a man putting his shoulder to a stuck door. The stuck thing moved. "Now," he heard himself say. "Now." They broke through there. It was not like a wall falling. It was like cloth tearing, with an awful rip and then the ragged edge that frays more as you look at it. They went through the rip. They made the rip wider. They ran at the gate. Ramsay saw it and wheeled and galloped. His horse ran like an arrow across the field. Jon did not follow, he sent others. He ran toward the gate on his own legs. One lumbered beside him, bleeding like a shed cart, dropping red chunks on the snow that steamed. Ghost went in front and leaped at a man on the wall. The man fell inward, and the cries from above were like crows startled off a carcass. The gate was strong oak bound with iron. They beat on it with axes, and they brought burning faggots to it, and they pried at it with bars, and it did what gates do. It held until it didn't. One put his huge hands on the wood and leaned in, groaning, and Jon thought he could hear the giant's bones complaining separately. The wood creaked and screamed and split, and then the iron screamed as well, and then there was a smell like old wine and rot and warmth and animal, and they were inside the mouth of the old stone beast. It was not over after that. Men fight like men inside walls as well. But the shape of it had changed. Sansa had been right about the repair on the eastern ward. It had been poorly done. Under one's hand it came apart like old bread crust. The men who had laughed when they sent arrows into camp did not laugh now. The Winterfell men who had been pretending to be Bolton men remembered that long name and began quietly to step back from knives as men step back from cliffs. The day went from cut to shove to batter to smash, like a sentence does when a man running out of breath throws words at it. Jon found himself in the Godswood. He had not meant to come here. He hardly knew he was here until he saw the red leaves and felt the soft white earth under his boots. The faces of the trees did not change. He had the wild thought that they had been waiting with their blank witness for this, had saved up seeing for this, had thrown away none of it. He stood for a moment with his breath going out of him and the world still blur-whitened with adrenaline. He put his free hand on the trunk of the heart tree and thought he felt something like a pulse under the bark. It was his own palm beating, he knew that, and he let himself pretend a moment that it was not. A hand came over his shoulder and something cold touched his throat. The other hand grabbed his arm. He did not have to see the man to know him. He could smell the sick sweet of his cruelty as men smell sweetness in a cupboard and know it is poison. Jon did not tense. He let his arm relax. He leaned his weight into the hand at his elbow as if he were tired, as if seeking a stranger's help. The knife at his throat pressed harder. A bead of blood ran down into the collar of his shirt like a little bug. He bent, turned, and the world became close and particular and a place where a man's balance was the whole story. He had been taught this when he was a boy by a man who had never liked him. He used it now and it saved him. Ramsay was quick. He killed because he delighted in it, and men who delight in a craft become skilled. But delight is a liar and skill is only what it is when it is tested by a man whose rage is clean. Jon got out of the knife line and got inside Ramsay's arms. He could smell the horse on him, the fear now leaking out of him like brine. They slammed together into the heart tree hard enough to shake snow from its leaves. They struggled. Ramsay tried to bite him. Jon put his forehead into Ramsay's nose and broke something there and saw the look in the other man's eyes change radically in a heartbeat, from smug pleasure to animal fear. "You wanted me," Jon said. His voice was very calm. His hands were very steady. "Now have me." Ramsay slashed up with a small knife he had kept back. Jon took the cut on the leather of his forearm. He did not feel the pain for a long minute. The cold and the fight made a mask. He drove the pommel of Longclaw into Ramsay's gut, and when the man folded he hammered down with his elbow onto the back of his neck. Ramsay fell forward into the snow in front of the heart tree, white flooding around him. He pushed himself up with his hands like a lizard. He made a sound like laughter and like choking. "I have your brother," he said thickly through blood. "A Stark is a small thing. I have had them like I have had hairs." Jon moved without interesting thought. There are things a man does not speak about afterwards. He drove his fist into Ramsay's mouth until the man stopped making sounds like words. He did not use Longclaw. His body wanted the language of flesh for this. It was not pretty. It felt like slipping down the last part of a slope you knew you could not climb up again. When he had finished he stood up and he was breathing like a man who had run a long way. He spat on the snow and there was blood in the spit. Sansa came into the God's Wood like a shard of winter. She stood a little way off and looked at the thing on the ground that had been the cause of many nights of waking and many days of not eating. She looked from Ramsay to Jon and back to Ramsay again and then to the trees as if asking them to witness this. The gods have seen worse, Jon thought, and then he thought, the gods have seen better. "He is yours," Jon said. His voice was hoarse. "Do what you will. Only do not let him leave this place." Sansa looked at him as if weighing something he did not know he carried. She nodded once. "I know what to do," she said, and her voice did not shake. Jon left her there in the red leaves. He went back through the hole in the eastern ward and came out into a yard that had seen too much and had not yet had enough. Men were still fighting on the steps of the great keep. One lay in the snow like a mountain that had decided it would sleep. There were so many arrows in him he looked like a hedgehog of giants. He was still breathing. He turned his head when Jon dropped to his knees beside that huge face and reached up like a hill moving in a windless place and touched Jon's chest with the end of one finger, very gently. It was an immense touch, an enormous kindness. The giant's eyes were clouded, but they looked into Jon's as if he could see a fire there. He said something in a language that had never had a book and never would. The sound of it was soft. Then he breathed out. He did not breathe in again. Jon bowed his head. He felt the hot rush of grief like a hand shoved hard against his ribs. Tormund stood behind him without speaking. When men came to pull arrows from the giant's hide, Tormund sent them away with a glance and then did it himself, one by one, because men should do what needs to be done by their own hands when they can. Snow began again, the small sting of it on skin like arguments from children. Irritating, unstoppable, ordinary. The courtyard cleared in a series of small battles and someone began to cheer, and then a dozen someones, and then 100. The Bolton banners came down. The old Stark banners came out as if they had been hidden in the walls and remembered how to live. They went up not all at once, but with a ragged beauty that made Jon's throat go tight. He had thought it would feel like coming home. It felt instead like something else, like seeing yourself when you had forgotten you had a face. After the fight, the quiet. It goes like that. In the hall, men had dragged the wounded into lines and the dead into other ones. Sansa came in with a handful of women from the town who had brought linen and hot water. She set to work without letting anyone look into her face too closely. Jon caught her eye at one point. She nodded once. He nodded back. They would speak when the most urgent part of the living was done. In the afternoon, the lords who had survived came to the great table in the great hall, as men have done for 1,000 winters. The fire burned clean and high. The walls breathed out the old memory of smoke. The banners hugged their poles. On the table was laid a small wolf of iron and 2 stones taken from the long low wall behind the godswood. Perhaps some house had set them there once as a game. Now they were tokens of something else. Jon set his hands down on the wood, and through it felt the slow thrum of Winterfell settling its bones. "You took this place with the free folk," Manderly said. He had the look of a man who had eaten too well for many years and was now going to eat as he ought. "I have lived long enough to see strange days. I took it with the men and women who would stand with me," Jon said. "I would have stood with any of you if you had called, and I had been able." Lord Glover's mouth tightened. "You are bastard-born," he said. He did not make it an insult so much as an accounting. Numbers must be said aloud. "I am," Jon said. "But you are a Stark," Lady Lyanna answered for him, like a gavel. "No," Jon said, and his voice was gentler than he felt. "No, I am Snow, and I will not be anything else to make the night easier to bear. Sansa is a Stark. Winterfell is hers by right if any right lives in this world." They looked at Sansa then. She felt the weight. Jon could see it, the old weight of eyes, of men's eyes that had always looked and weighed and taken. She did not duck under it. "I will take the name I was born with," she said. "I will swear to hold Winterfell for all the North, and to feed it before I feed myself. I will swear to fight what comes from the dark before I fight your neighbor. I will say the words you want me to say, and I will eat them if I fail. But hear this, I did not take Winterfell. My brother did. He did it with those you call savages. If you will not sit at a board with the free folk, then leave this hall and do not come back, because you will not sit at a board with me." Tormund snorted with a kind of delight. The lords around the table shifted, not all out of discomfort, some out of relief. There is a kind of man who wants to be told where his better self lies hidden and wants the permission to take it up. Manderly set his wide hands on the table. You would have us swear to a Stark girl, and to a bastard of Winterfell who wears a black cloak, and to an army of wild men and women who used to raid the coast and carry off our boys and girls? There was not scorn in it. There was the sound of a tallying CL. Urk doing his sums out loud as men had to do when numbers were too big to just hold in the head. Yes, Sansa said, because they fought when you did not. Because when a Stark asked them, they said yes. The hall breathed. Lord Serwyn cleared his throat. I have known sager men than I, he said. And they died stupid deaths all the same. I will put my voice with the girl who has seen what she has seen and still speaks. Lyanna Mormont stood up. She had not bothered with a taller chair. When she stood, she was still shorter than the table, and her voice made men lean in to hear and made them the better for having done so. We did not kneel for Karstark or Umber when they bent their necks to a flayer, she said. We did not for Stannis while his fire woman whispered. We will not do it now. We will call the young wolf by whatever name he wishes to take, and we will say it loud enough for the dead to hear. She tipped her chin at Jon. You saved my island when we were starving. You let my men and boys and women in and did not ask them to be less than they were. You stood between them and a cold wind. I say king. The word fell like a log into a river that had waited for something to make it go somewhere. Jon raised his hand mildly. No, he said. Listen, we have other enemies than men with pretty banners. I think many here have seen things in the night. I have seen more. I will go back to the wall for that fight, when I have done what I must here. Sansa will be Lady of Winterfell. Let the North be the North, and let it have a head with the right name. But the room had already begun to move another way. There is a current that runs when men feel their courage return. It makes tides where there were none. The cry began whispering, then built like a weather line. King in the North, someone said, and then a dozen, and then it hit the old stones and bounced back bigger. King in the North. Jon shook his head. He wanted to tell them what kings were and how they died and how easy it was to love a man who said no and then make him pay for saying yes. He wanted to tell them that he was not the shape they wanted and that the ice the wall was made of was not the kind a king could command. Instead, he lifted both hands and the room quieted. He stepped aside so he stood half behind Sansa. It was a simple gesture. It was everything. Lady of Winterfell, he said. He looked at Sansa and made sure she knew he was not playing. There are names to be read and sentences to be passed. There are dead to be burned while their names are still warm. There is bread to be baked. There is a land to be walked and listened to. That is your work. My work is to hold a door on hinges that are older than any of us can count, long enough for you to build a world inside that door again. If you will have me as a sword you point north and not as a crown you hang up in a hall, I will take that. The hall, which had been so eager for a crown, found something in that was almost as good, perhaps better. Men like to be given roles in a story that feels as if it will last. The relief moved through them in the small sags of shoulders and the way a man puts his hand on the rim of a cup instead of the handle. Manderly lifted his cup. To the Lady of Winterfell, he said, and to her sword. The toasts were simple and there was bread in them and there was salt. That was a good thing. The hallmark of good oaths is when the bread has enough salt and the salt knows it is for bread. That night Jon went to the top of the broken ring wall where the wind hits first and hits hardest. Ghost went with him and lay down with his head on his paws and looked at the night they had all come through. The stars were knives and beautiful. Sansa came. He knew her step as he knew the sound the old boards of the Winterfell library made when stepped on near the north window. She came without a cloak and did not shiver. You would really go back? She asked. After what they just tried to put on your shoulders? Yes, he said. It's where I am supposed to be. She was quiet a long time. You were supposed to be my brother too, she said. Not in accusation but in simple testimony. And you were. Even when I forgot what that meant. He put his arm around her and she let him. They stood like that with the old stones remembering every foot that had stood there before them under the same stars. The world made its slow cold noises. When Sansa left she kissed his cheek. He did not weep until she was gone. There were letters to be written and sent. There was Ramsay to be tried, not for what he had done to them, but for what he had done to those who could not speak. Sansa did not flinch in the yard. She did not flinch in the kennel where the dogs watched with yellow eyes. She did what needed doing and did not ask anyone else to soil their hands where her hands had been soaked already. There is justice and there is vengeance, and sometimes they are the same size. Jon spent the morning after that in the library with what maps Winterfell had not lost to the fire, and with a boy whose face was thin and clever, and who had a voice too loud for a library. "Gren used to snore like a bear," the boy said when Jon's mind had wandered. Jon smiled a little. "The dead do not leave. They just move to where they can see you better." The greenhouse, miraculously, still gave up a little green, and someone set onion tops and parsley on the table while he worked, and he put a stalk in his mouth and chewed on it and felt his mind clear. There were roads to be watched. There were villages to be warned. There were ravens to be sent to the night's watch with a packet. Grain, arrows, new woolen socks, thick mittens, ugly and necessary, and a letter in Jon's own hand to Ed that said more than it wrote by the way the words had been put down. Said, "I left. I am returning." It said, "Do not die." It said, "I am still the man you knew, even if the name they try to give me is loud." The Wildlings built their camp on the south side of the keep rather than inside its walls. They said the air was better there and the sky did not feel small. Jon spent as much time there as he spent in halls, sitting on a stump with a pot of stew by his knees, talking to a woman who had lost 2 sons to the dead things and wanted to know if the next winter would be kinder. He told her the truth he had learned. The weather does not care about our losses, and so we must. He took a piece of her bread and she took a piece of his honesty, and they were both warmed by it. In the evening, Melisandre came to him at the edge of the godswood. She moved like smoke. The fox pelt of her hair was unbound and bled down her back. Her eyes were full of the same fire that had led men to seek kings in places where none were hiding. "You did not die," she said. "I did not," Jon said. "I saw it once," she said. "In a bowl of fire, or I thought I did. A man with your face, a blade of darkness and light in his hand. A breath that came not from his lungs but from across the world." She tilted her head. "I do not trust what I see. That is something I have learned late." "Good," Jon said. "Doubt is an honest fire sometimes. It burns away the wolves and leaves the men behind." She smiled in a way that had little to do with warmth. "You speak like a man who has decided what he is." "I've decided I am a man who will not pretend there isn't a storm coming," Jon said. "I've decided that the Northmen and the Free Folk will stand with their faces to the wind together, and that we will die like men if we die. I've decided to do what I can to make dying happen to other things besides us." "I can give you a sword that burns," she said. "No," Jon said. "Give me a letter to the south instead. There are men who fight with numbers and ink. I would put them to my work." She seemed startled. Then she inclined her head with the dignity of someone who has been valuable another way before and will be again. "Ink then," she said. "Ink that burns slow." Before a fortnight had passed, the courtyards of Winterfell no longer rang only with hammers on armor, but with laughter like men had forgotten how to keep to themselves. The kitchens began to turn out thicker stews. The storerooms gave up their dried peas, and the peaspots did what peas can do when salt is right and a bit of pork finds the bottom. The winter towns sent what they had, and received back what they needed. The free folk bartered hides for iron and iron for wheat and wheat for salt and salt for stories. There were fights, yes, there are always fights when men pretend to learn to love each other. But there were fewer as the work got good. At the wall, word came that Ed had set men to building fires on the inner face every 3rd night, and that the blue lights in the woods had turned away from them like eyes blinking. There were names of dead men in the letters and names of babies too, and that is how you know whether a place is still a place and not just a grave. Jon sent back the things men needed before they needed them. The ravens began to know the shape of his hand and the shape of Winterfell. One morning he woke before dawn to a stillness so complete it woke him. He sat up in the room in the great keep that had been given him because you have to give a man like him a room somewhere even if he does not want it, and he listened. The world outside held its breath. He dressed and went out. The courtyard stretched, empty and floored with ice that had knit smooth overnight. Ghost tracks were like thoughts across it. Jon went to the godswood. He had never had a true vision. He did not expect one now. The heart tree was a red hand raised in prayer against the white of the world. Jon stood with his breath in the collar of his cloak. The pool was frozen. He looked into it and saw nothing. He did not expect to see anything else. Then, in the ice there was a shadow that was not his. It moved as the ice did not. He bent closer. He did not see another face. He saw himself. He did not see a crown. He saw a door. He saw himself standing with his back to it, bent like a man holding a log in a doorframe. He saw the dead pressing and pressing. He saw living faces behind him in the room, Sansa and Tormund and Lyanna Mormont, and a giant holding a child in one palm, and a woman stirring a pot, and a man mending a boot. He saw that if he moved, those faces would be gone. He saw that if he stayed, he would be gone. He smiled then, which surprised him. The smile felt like the first bite of hot bread after too many days in the cold. He put his hand on the tree and thanked whatever had given him that. When he turned to go, Sansa was there. "Do you see them?" she asked. "I see us," Jon said. "It's enough." She nodded. "Galbart returns today. He has gone to the Fingers and writ to the man who runs the Vale." She would not say his name. It tasted too much like poison. "If he sends men, he sends men. If he does not, we have what we have." "We have what we have," Jon agreed. "And we have the thing that comes." "Do not go too soon," she said. "Give them time to call you back. Men do not know how to say the thing they need. Give them a shape of you in their minds before you leave, so they do not forget it." "I am not leaving them me," Jon said gently. "I am leaving them you." They stood touching shoulders in the cold. The dawn crawled up, slow and gray, under cloud. The day took a breath, then went on. When finally he rode north again, a fortnight later, it was with Ghost and Tormund and 300 free folk who had decided that the best way to keep the promises they had given him was to muscle them into being with their own hands. The gates of Winterfell swung out for them and closed behind them, and Jon felt like a man who had bid a child good night and knows he will not sleep for listening for sounds from the other room. Sansa stood on the battlements with her cloak streaming and the white of the snow on her hair. She raised her hand. He raised his. They did not look away while they could still see each other. The road to the wall felt different, like walking back along the steps you left in the snow to see whether they had filled in. Every place they had fought, the land remembered. Men they passed did not flinch. A woman with a child on her hip pushed a jar of pickled roots into Jon's hands without a word, and then put her hands to his face and held it for a heartbeat as if blessing him. He had never thought his face was a thing that could be blessed. He let her hands teach him otherwise. At the Bridge of Skulls, a band of spearwives from Hardhome met them, thin as rope but strong as rope is. They brought news of lights in the far woods and of ice that crept without wind, and of a deer they had found frozen where it stood as if it had been surprised, and of boots that had crunched louder than they should have. Jon listened. Then he sent them with a letter to Sansa tied in the hood of the child on the tallest spearwife's back, and the child slept through the writing of the future. When at last the wall rose in front of them like it had grown there overnight, Tormund shook his head and spat, not in contempt so much as in acknowledgement of a thing too big to swallow all at once. The gate opened. Ed was there, and men Jon knew by the shapes of their shoulders under cloaks. They had not let the black fade from their cloaks while he was gone. That mattered. Ed looked at him and did not smile, but his eyes did something small that meant all the smiling he would ever do. "You came back," Ed said. "I said I would," Jon said. Ed gestured behind him at the wall as if it were a tired horse. "It missed you." "Liar," Jon said softly and looked up. The great ice looked back without change. That steadied him. He breathed in the old smell of it. Cold rock, old wind, the memory of men who had given up things and gotten other things they had not wanted in return. He put his hand to the old wood of the gate and felt its beat, as he had felt the heart trees, as he had felt the table at Winterfell. There are hearts in things made by men when enough hands have touched them. In the yard a boy he did not know ran across carrying a bundle of arrows. A woman from the Free Folk was instructing 3 Southron lads in the way to twist the fletching. A brother's bannerman was nailing a small shelf into a tower wall for a candle. The world does what it needs to do while kings and bastards are deciding. Jon took that in and felt eased. That night, in his old narrow bed, he slept without dreams for the first time in months. In the morning he woke to the horn that says riders. He went out, already moving toward the gate. The snow was light, the light was pale. The breath of ghost made the same white he had made every morning for many mornings. He looked through the gate and saw a company of men on rough horses riding hard, with no banner raised and their faces set. He put his hand on Longclaw and did not draw it. When they came close he knew the man at their head, Lord Hornwood's younger brother, who had a scar that made his left eye look always a little sorrowful. "My lord," Lord Hornwood's brother said, too breathless to remember the names Jon would have had him use. "They're moving. We saw them beyond the lake, tall as the stories. They walk where men do not like to walk. They do not bend. They do not slip. The ones who bring the cold." Jon nodded once, because any more than that would be theater. "Show me," he said. Then he turned to Ed. "Hold the gate. If I do not return by nightfall, close it. If I do not return by tomorrow, burn every bridge you have taught men to trust." Ed did not argue. He had learned the way you have to learn, by losing. He set his hand on Jon's forearm briefly. "Don't take too long," he said. Jon rode out again into the white. He did not look back. A man holding a door does not look behind him while he holds it. He looks where the weight is. He thinks of the people behind him and makes what stands in front of him smaller by remembering their names. The trees thinned. The snow changed texture and began to squeak under the horses' hooves. The air grew drier, a whisper of cold so profound it made the lungs ask whether they were being lied to. The Hornwood men pointed without voices. Jon lifted a hand and they stopped. He rode on with Ghost and Tormund and 3 others. He did not grip the reins harder. He did not let them go slack. They stood at last at the edge of a low plateau. Beyond it the land ran flat and bare, a white sea without waves. And they were there. They were there as if they had been there always, as if the snow had grown them, tall shapes with blue fire burning in the dark of them, walking slowly, patiently, not as men walk but as rivers move. Behind them, for as far as Jon could see, a legion moved, men who had been men, women who had been women, children who had been children, now strange within their own bones. Their eyes were a long cold song. "I have seen you," Jon said softly in his own tongue. "And you have seen me." One of them, tall, taller than any man but not as large as the giant had been, turned its head slightly. Jon felt the tiny hair on his arms move under his shirt, as if a hand had skimmed above his skin. There was no breath in the air around the thing. Snow whirled out from its ankles the way flour jumps away from a baker's hand. It raised a long weapon that seemed to be made of a thing that had once been water and not water. Pointed. Jon felt the measure of himself taken as a man weighs a log. He drew Longclaw. The Valyrian steel drank the light. For a moment none of the others moved. Tormund muttered something that was half prayer and half a list of obscenities, which in his mouth was probably the same thing. The first rangy line of the dead stepped forward as one. They made no sound. Jon breathed once, twice. The cold went all the way inside him and made something brittle in him hard instead. He lifted Longclaw. He stepped forward. He did not think of kings or halls or banners. He thought of a woman stirring a pot. He thought of a girl who sat straight in a chair too big for her. He thought of a giant who had said a soft word in a tongue no book would ever record. He thought of a boy whose hands had reached for him and of not reaching too late again. Not ever, not while his body could still stand between. Behind him, far behind him, Winterfell stones remembered the day the banners were changed and the night the bread was salted and broken. Behind him, Bear Island still lifted its head against the gale and would lift it tomorrow too. Behind him, a girl with hair like the red leaves of a heart tree stood on a wall and watched the road and did not weep at the place where it turned and did not show you more. Behind him, an old wall of ice waited to be what it had always been and knew what it was. Jon stepped forward again. Ghost went with him. Tormund laughed a terrible laugh. The air rang with a sound that was not metal, not wind, not bone, but something made when a man decides and does not undecide. The dead came on. The living did the only thing they ever do when they are who they say they are. They held.